2, 1. When I see the screen, I will switch. Sorry, I'm waiting for the screen to pop. 2. Screen to pop. Go.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Abby Winograd. I am the MacArthur Fellows 40th Anniversary Exhibition.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Abby Winograd. I am the MacArthur Fellows.
Sorry, guys. Hold on one
40th
second.
Anniversary Exhibition. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Abby Winograd. I am the
Sorry about that technical difficulty. So to start again, my name is Abby Winograd. I am the MacArthur Fellows 40th Anniversary Exhibition Curator at the Smart Museum of Art. I'm really excited to be joined today by a couple of very important guests, but I just want to give a little bit of background about why we are here. I invited Wendy Ewald to be a part of an exhibition called Toward Common Cause, Art, Social Change, and the MacArthur Fellows Program, which is opening in Chicago in mid-July, to work on a project that was based in the city of Chicago. And this is partially because the exhibition explores the relationship between politics and social change. And we wanted to consider how art could respond to moments of crisis. And when we started this project together, Wendy and I in 2018, we couldn't have possibly imagined where we would be in the beginning of 2021, but I think it's more important than ever that we have this conversation. And so I just want to introduce all of my friends here and say that Wendy has been coming to Chicago when she was able, and now remotely been working with 10 students at Centro Romero. So Wendy is a visual artist, a photographer who has been working with children, families, and teachers all over the world for the last 40 years. And her practice encourages her collaborators to use the camera to tell their own stories. And her work challenges notions of authorship and interrogates ideas of artist intention, power, and identity. Jason DeLeon is also an anthropologist, MacArthur Fellow, and professor at the University of California, Los Angeles. He is the director of the Undocumented Migration Project and organizer of a traveling exhibition called Hostile Terrains. Daisy Funes is the founder and now director of Centro Romero, a community organization on Chicago's northeast side, which was founded by Salvadorian refugees in the 1980s. To meet the needs of the immigrant refugee community from Central America. And Susana Salgado is the director of the youth program at Centro Romero and an invaluable contributor and collaborator for the work that we've been doing with Centro for the past year and a half. So what we'll do now is I'm gonna turn it over to the team to play a video that will show you a little bit about the work that we've been doing with Centro and feature the kids who Wendy and Susana have been working with. And when we come back from that, we'll discuss a little bit the relationship between these four wonderful people and the work that they do every day.
To Daily Life with Dreams During Pandemic Art and Photo Exhibition. Centro Romero and their students collaborated with Wendy Ewald, Columbia College, Chicago Smart Museum of Arts, part of the Toward Common Cause, Art, Social Change, and the MacArthur Fellow Program Authority.
So this work is going to be part of a citywide exhibition called Toward Common Cause that will open next summer. So these young people who are working with the artist Wendy Ewald will continue to iterate on the work they made here to do a large-scale public installation that will be presented in the city next summer.
My name is Zulairan Toro, and I am one of the 10 students from Centro Romero that worked on this project. This past summer, we worked in Centro Romero for 5 weeks regarding this project, and it was overall a great experience. I got to see the world around me through the eye of an artist.
Who were brave enough to participate in the project, and then hopefully you guys, later on we can continue. You guys can have a camera. Maybe the goal might be that all the youth have a camera in their hands so that they can, as Sully said, see the world through the lens. When Columbia Theater and everybody brought the professional studio downstairs in the basement, and you can see the sparkle in the youth's eyes when they were able to see that and experience that firsthand. Those are some of the pictures and the moments that I think that they enjoyed a lot. So thank you so much.
Susanna, I think we can turn it over to you to tell us a little bit more about the project and the experience. And Wendy, it would be great if you both could speak a little bit about how this project developed and the the impacts of the pandemic on the work that you plan to do and the work that we ended up doing over the summer.
Yes, thank you, Wendy. Do you wanna start where the idea came from? You're on mute.
Yes. Yeah. Well, when Abby asked me to work on the project, I had been working for the past 10 almost years with immigrant and refugee communities in different places in this country and in the UK, and so I, was very interested in the historical Mexican community that was in Chicago, and thought it would be interesting to build on that and important to build on the work I had done with a community organization in Chicago. And we met Susanna early on, and I was incredibly impressed with the work that they were doing, which was both legal and cultural and sort of served the needs of the whole community and the whole person. So it would seem like a natural partnership. And but as Abby said, what ended up happening was very different than what I had hoped, and it was very difficult for me anyway, and because I couldn't be there, and so much depends of how I work, making relationships with people and being there and understanding how things work. But Susanna and Veronica really helped create this space that we could connect as much as we could, and it really became about something else. It became about what was happening in their lives right now, which had a sort of struggle and blankness in a way because of their confines, and so it was very interesting to work in that space and work with them and to get the kids out and looking and in a different way. So I'm really grateful. We couldn't obviously have done anything without your help.
Yeah, and we're thankful for everybody because that you guys provided this opportunity for all of our youth. One of the things that we try to do is expose our kids to different activities, and exposing them to photography, to this project has opened their mind. And as Wendy mentioned, it was a struggle. We had an idea at the beginning of how it was going to work, and then the pandemic happened, and we had to be creative. But one of the things that I do want to highlight is that although we had an idea, after talking to the youth, we changed, right, the idea and the project. Now it's being led by the youth. It's what are they, like Wendy mentioned, right? It was about the immigration, it was about their life, and now it's their life with COVID, what's happening with COVID, right? And what has changed. So I really thank Wendy and, Veronica and the youth workers, the support from everybody to have the social distance, masks and everything. But we're also doing a lot of activities, like going out on a field trip, on a walks, community walks, to take the pictures. They're taking pictures at home as well, meeting with Wendy through one-on-ones, but at the same time through Zoom, some of them here, some of them at their homes. I really thank Wendy and everybody, because they have given them that opportunity to express themselves, and the project to be led by them as well.
I wonder if Jason and Daisy, you want to talk a little bit about, visuality and why it's so important for these kinds of collaborations. And maybe Jason, you can say, or Wendy, you can say a little bit about how you two work together and why you connected. But I know, in all of our conversations, this question of visibility and invisibility, and giving, the immigrant community, but the undocumented community as well, a way to advocate for themselves, which is at the heart of Wendy's practice, which is why this was such a good fit in terms of trying to bring together an artist and a community activist. And it's a lot of questions in one, but I wonder if either of you want to jump in, or Wendy, if you have something to say on that score.
Well, as far as Jason and I go, I mean, this was sort of, we knew about each other from before, but we had only met recently at a MacArthur meeting. And then, but like so many meetings, when you think somebody through their work, it was, there were just a lot of ideas and thoughts generated. So we're hoping to make a trip to Mexico as soon as we can get there, and go to Chiapas, which concerns both me, because that's where I worked in 1991, and Jason, because of his border work. You want to say something about that?
Yeah, I mean, we were supposed to have already been there and come back.
That's right.
Now we are still planning to go there and do some things. And I think Wendy and I both share this, sort of passion for finding ways to give people the tools to tell their stories. And we had this conversation before about, there's this phrase where people say, it's about giving a voice to the voiceless. And I think that neither one of us sort of buy into that. We think it's more about, giving people tools so that they can control the narrative and that they can speak for themselves, and that we don't have to be the gatekeepers for their voices, which I think too often, can be the case. And I think so our plan had been to go to Chiapas to work with youth there, to be thinking about how these communities were experiencing migration, both because family members had been leaving, or they themselves were potentially getting ready to leave, and then also how places like Chiapas are directly impacted by a ramping up of border enforcement by Mexico with the support of the United States, and the way in which Mexican migration now is deeply intertwined with Central American migration. And so I've worked in Chiapas since 2015, largely with Central American migrants coming through and trying to understand how people experience Mexico as a place of crossing, the tensions between Mexicans and Central Americans coming through, but then also finding ways can we help those folks to then describe their own experiences to the world. And for me, the issue of the visual is so crucial, because I find that it really is it's incredibly accessible. It transcends language. I think that it allows people to show their perspectives in ways that's easily understandable for folks who might not speak Spanish. So for me, it's always been a really interesting and powerful tool, and also one that I think that the youth really, it's just an amazing thing to see them pick up a camera and then go and document their lives. I mean, for me, it's just a very humbling and inspiring thing to see. And so eventually Wendy and I will get back to Mexico and begin to do this. But, you know, but part of the issue too, part of what we wanted to do was really was to connect Chiapas with Chicago, you know, because of these long-term historical relationships.
Yeah. So Daisy, I would love to hear from you a little bit. We can hear about the history of Centro Romero, but obviously, you know, Jason's project and the geography corresponds to the work that you do, that you've historically done in Central America, but also to, you know, the experience of recently arrived immigrants now and how it's a changing landscape. And, you know, this kind of question of a migration crisis was an urgent issue when Wendy and I started talking about this project, but it has become increasingly urgent over the past 3 years, but, you know, even more difficult in the pandemic. And I wonder if you can say a little bit about that. And then maybe Susana, you know, this idea of, you know, letting people tell their own stories and how the kids have experienced that and what's that's meant over the last couple of months. That would be great.
I mean, thank you. I think this is a very important topic for us because Centro Romero was founded for immigrants and refugees. And the idea was not to speak for themselves, but we are refugees ourselves who founded the institution. So the difference is that somebody will do it for you as you're part of it. You have your voice, you have your commitment. So this is when we're talking about immigration, this is where we're talking about human rights, because it is important for those immigrants and those kids that are in cages that somebody who is outside will speak and don't forget them in the process. People who've been dying of COVID at this moment, who have not received any type of support. We're talking about immigrants themselves and people who've been here for 2 decades, living in this country, working legally, and now with the previous, still in the moment, the administration, we are always a target. So what can we do, right? So our kids, I mean, if the parents are suffering, of course, our young kids are also suffering because they receive the environment, they live in the same space. So we see this as this type of collaboration opportunity for the kids to express themselves through their art and be appreciated where they can become. So nurture their skills, nurture what they have, and see there's a potential for them to become the new leaders in our community. Because we're old, we are in our way out somewhere, right? So we need to leave a legacy. So our kids, when they come to Centro Romero, not only they have help with their homework, with their assistants, but also they have an opportunity to communicate with others, to help, give, and have a voice. I think this is where we give them an opportunity to say, this is you are part of that community. You're not just a kid or a child. You're part of our community. So do things that will help you, but it will help others. So that's the idea, right? So create this community where everybody can be acknowledged, but also don't forget those ones that's still there, and we need to change policies, immigration policies, that will be beneficial to immigrants and not torture them as unwelcome immigrants or refugees.
Yeah, and as Daisy mentioned, right, we want to nurture their skills and we want to make sure that they have, and Jason mentioned it, right, we don't want to be the voice of them. We want them to use their own voice. And, you know, it might not be speaking, you know, literally using their voice, but they can definitely do it through writing, through art, through photography. And I'm going to share a couple of the pictures that our youth have taken where they show their voice. So for example, we have Adriana here who take a picture of her mom's feet. And the text goes that, you know, she acknowledges the work that she's done. She got home from work and she was tired. So she decided to take a picture to acknowledge all the effort that the mom does. Community for all. This is another one. And then we have also Angels. He shows his faith through his pictures. Mhm. And also his hopes of ending COVID. Muerte al virus. So, you know, through art, through pictures, they share that. We have another one here with Dolores Huerta, right? A rebel, an activist, a feminist. So everybody shares their, like Daisy mentioned, they get affected. Our families are getting affected by everything that's happening around them, their environment. Sometimes they don't know how to express themselves, but they do take pictures, and family separation. So, you know, and we also do a lot of different activities with them, depending on their age. We usually tell them there's no age limit. It doesn't matter how old you are. You can definitely express yourself. And you can make a difference in this world, right? It can be by cleaning the streets, going out and picking up garbage. During the summer, they planted a garden, a community garden to have our streets clean. We've gone to rallies downtown, immigration rallies, DACA, TPS. They have talked to state representatives about their situation. So everybody can, you know, that's one of the things that we try to work with our youth, giving them their social skills, their leadership, develop their leadership skills so that they can, you know, have those tools and speak for themselves. A lot of them come from immigrant families. Me, myself, I was a program participant of the youth program back in the 1996, around that age, you know, like as Daisy said, we're a little bit older now, but I usually say I'm a product of Centro Romero, right? Because I was part of Centro when I was in school, in high school. You know, and it doesn't matter, you know, sometimes we see our families walking together for a rally, asking for support for other families. Right now, during the pandemic, all of our families were willing to help other families. And that's something beautiful to see, that within the Centro Romero, we have built community as well.
Wendy, I wonder if you can talk a little bit about process and how you work and you know, how that has developed over the years. And then I you know, we can start there, but it would be great, I think, also to Jason, for you and maybe for Wendy to talk a little bit about the relationship between art and anthropology and activism, because you know, that's not necessarily a straight line that people draw, but it is so central to what you both do, and why you're working together now. So it would be great. It would be great to hear more about that from you both.
Wendy, you're on mute.
Thank you. Sorry, my dog is snoring, and I really don't want everybody to hear that. But my my idea of being an artist really has grown over the years, and I have been doing this for 50 years or something like that. But it's really come out of my desire or my desire that I observed to see how people want to pay attention to their visual surroundings, and also all of our deep need to articulate and communicate something relevant about our lives. You know, no matter who we are and where we are. And but also I think like Jason are really you know, looking at the boundaries that separate us as communities by language, by political situation, by the economy, by whatever, and you know, and how the institutions in our, you know, governments in our daily lives provide those barriers, and what we can do to with our art to deal with that. And so, you know, really for me, I thought a lot about how we learn and how we express ourselves with images, and identifying. I've tried to identify those barriers that are created, from childhood, my work as an artist is also intertwined with my work as a teacher. I never studied education, but I'm interested, and I always thought I might be an anthropologist, but I never did study that either. I just kept making images or figuring out ways of making images. So when I saw what Jason was doing, I thought, oh, okay, this might have been me at a different time. And so, what I'm interested in is seeing the world through others' perceptions, obviously, as well as my own, and how can we work to use what we have to give as artists and image makers and writers and whatever to that process. Not to give a voice, but how can we share what we have, So when I started in 1969, I immediately saw that there was a power to the pictures that the kids that I worked with on a Native American reservation took, and from then on, it was obvious to me that that way of seeing and that way of working had to be shared, and so I think that that is continuing to motivate me, all these years later in different situations.
Jason?
Yeah, I mean, I think, if you look at like the work that Wendy has done over the years, I think so much of it is ethnographic. And for me, the beauty of it is it's ethnographic from the perspective of oftentimes, kids. I think that, the images are so striking and are, for me, in a lot of ways, more powerful than any type of writing that an anthropologist would have done. I mean, I think about the work in Peru, the work in Appalachia. There are images that just you could not. It wouldn't matter how many years you spend there writing about this from an outside. I think you would never be able to capture the sort of feeling that these images oftentimes do, and that's always really just fascinated me. And with my own work, over the years I've gone back and forth with taking my own images or working with photographers, but I've always been interested in giving cameras to migrants, to people who I'm working with, in hopes that they can provide some new kind of insight. And oftentimes it is, it's much more powerful than any image that I could have made. And so I'm always interested in that. What am I missing? What am I not seeing? And what happens when we give people cameras? Are there things that can show up now that I never would have caught? And I think that there's a lot to be said for that kind of approach. And for me, obviously, it's been inspired by the work of Wendy. And so that's something that I just get really, really excited about. I mean, and in terms of this question about art and anthropology, I'm sort of at the point now where I try to not think about subdisciplinary boundaries. I'm not that interested in what, is it anthropology? Is it art? And I think that's kind of the benefit of post tenure. I don't have to necessarily justify myself to folks now, which is incredibly liberating. And I think for me is probably the most important part of that is to have this freedom now to just not have to worry about defending it, against people who would say, is it this or is it that? And just saying, it just is, and it can be all those things. And for me, that's where the power of the approach comes. And I think a lot of my work lately is a direct reaction to the constraints of the academy, and to saying to folks that I have no interest in writing journal articles or book chapters, I'm interested in books, but I'm interested in books that are accessible. I'm interested in images. I'm interested in exhibitions. I'm interested in podcasts and films, things that go far beyond, my colleagues or, the people who would supposedly be peer reviewing my work. I mean, I'm of course interested in engaging with them, but not having them be the only audience and have these other folks be sort of secondary. So for me, the kind of push towards embracing these other approaches is about accessibility, is about new kinds of audiences, taking other audiences very seriously, and not treating them as sort of secondary, and really just I think that there's so much to be said for trying to disseminate anthropology in new kinds of ways. For me, that's like really, really exciting to think about. Okay, what happens if I combine this and this? And I think part of that came from the fact that growing up and for most of my life, I've been a musician. I've been interested in writing. I've been interested in fiction, and these were all things that I was told by the academy that had to be very secondary to, or completely separate from the anthropology, from the scholarly kind of work. And it wasn't until I saw that those things really just informed all of the anthropology that I'd been doing my entire life, and informed my way of thinking about the world, that if I embraced them, then suddenly now I felt like I was actually doing all the things that I was excited about at once, and for me to be able to bridge those things is just really, really exciting. And I'm working now with a lot of students who come to me and say, I want to be an anthropologist, but I'm also a poet. I'm also a filmmaker. I want to take pictures. Can I do those things? And no one ever told me that I could do those things. I was always told that they had to be separate. And so now, I think I'm trying to help foster, this new wave of students who don't see those boundaries and understand that they can embrace all those things, and it's part of their practice, whether that's ethnographic practice or artistic practice or some combination of those things. That's where I'm seeing the kind of most. That's where I get the most excited, is at those intersections.
Daisy and Susanna, it's interesting for me to hear, Jason and Wendy, that, this is the goal of the exhibition in some ways, is to kind of break down the boundaries between exhibitions and public art, and, to do something that's interdisciplinary in the way that this conversation is, and think about the ways that, that Wendy has been doing since 1969, and thinking about, this kind of erasing the need to have ownership over something that you make, and that it's not just the province of fine art museums, but that it has meaning outside of those spaces. And I just want to add here that the work that Wendy is doing with the students is our plan is to turn that into a kind of a public project, so that the students' work that they're making collaboratively with Wendy would be a public project that is visible in the city of Chicago, all over the city, in the second half of this year. So I wonder a little bit about, I know that at Central, right, you use art as a kind of a tool in the youth program, but as a kind of larger experience for the goals of Central and its advocacy for immigrants, how you think about breaking down those boundaries and how this is useful for the kind of advocacy work that you do. You're both waiting for who Mike here.
I can go. I think that's maybe Daisy can say a little bit more about it, but I think that as organization, we've had the opportunity to use art to show and to express in every different programs that we have. Some of our domestic violence women have, expressed their art through books that they have created, handmade books, or, through selling through the arts and crafts. Our public benefits department as well, and our legal department, through writing. So, we do have art throughout the whole organization, and for them to express themselves. As we've mentioned, right, if this turns into a public activity or an exhibition, it's something that we have talked to the youth, right? What do you want to let the other people know? right? It's coming, like you have this opportunity to show them how you're feeling about anything, right? We've talked COVID, we've talked immigration, our faith, our families. So I think that this is a good opportunity for them to show that, right? To let them know from their point of view, as Jason was saying, it's a different perspective from other people coming from them actually. So they have this opportunity to show and to actually tell them what they want them to know. So for example, one of our teens, Suli, she was saying, I want to let them know that I grew up here. She's a DACA recipient, right? And I want to let them know that I grew up here, that I love this country the same way as everybody else. But I also want to let them know that I love to dance, salsa or Hispanic music, that I love my family, and that, I want to accomplish more things like higher education, that I'm no different than them. I don't want them to see me as, oh, they just came to this country, or things like that. So they have this opportunity to show that. One of the youth also programmed their camera and put it in a microwave because they wanted it to see what was the hamburger looking at when you put it in a microwave. So this has opened the opportunity for them to be very creative about what they want to show the people and the photographers. But I don't know if Daisy wants to mention something also about that.
I think that first of all, this project, I hope it's not the only one we do. It's one of many. And definitely immigrants, refugees are being portrayed like people that is undesirable. People that come here, but what we want to say is they bring knowledge. They bring something with you. They bring culture. They bring richness. So I think that it's easy for people to see through pictures. It's easy for people to understand, even you're not very into the arts, but I think you can understand it because the same aspirations like everybody else have, like everybody wanted to, to have good kids. They want to have good parents. They want to be a good citizens. And through pictures, people can see it, right? So it can be expressed also. There's not a lot of writing to be done. It's more of how do you take that information. I think Centro Romero, what it's looking for, we have the people. We have the immigrants. We have the power of doing so much things. We just need the partnerships. And I think this is where we come from. We come from an experience that everybody, when they come or arrive to this country, want to bring something and give something back and show how much they can change their family and support of families around us. Not only themselves, but reach everybody else, right? So, and what I say to one of our families who was deported, they just come through the border, and one of their child, they bring a new kid with them. This kid was afraid, and he was afraid of everything. And the only place they received support, because they're client of Centro Romero, it was Centro Romero feel like a space they can express themselves. And I think this is where partnership work. Not only with the students, but with the university, their partnership. Sometimes they don't know how, they just need a tool. And I think this is where we need everybody's help. So we need to nurture our new leadership. We need to nurture our kids, our new generations, our students that are becoming new professionals, right? So they can join board members, they can become a board and create institutions such as Centro and support them. So I can talk about a lot of Centro Romero, but what I can say is we are so happy to work with Wendy, and definitely I would like Jason to come over to Centro Romero and visit us and see what we're talking about. Because when you leave the experience and you see what we're talking about, it's easy to say, yeah, I want to be part of it. I want to help. And I think that this is the opportunity for us to be in this platform today. It's inviting everybody to walk in, help those that need it most, and be part of the change. That's all we're asking.
Yeah. And I think that's a great question for Jason and for Wendy, and then we'll start to get to some questions in the chat. But this question of collaboration and interdisciplinarity. Obviously, Jason, you said how that's been so important to your work, and Wendy, I know it's important to yours, but I wonder what kinds of organizations you find are most receptive to what you do and which aren't, and your hopes, what you've learned over the years, Wendy, in doing this, and Jason, the same for you. We lost Wendy's video. She'll be back in a second. Oh, Jason.
It's not, it often surprised me, the organizations that I've worked with that, that we're not necessarily alike. Like if I'm working try to work with an organization, sometimes that's a cultural or artistic organization, it's less interesting to me than to work with an organization like Centro that has it's broad and it's looking at the whole community and it includes law and activism and cultural, but so it's sometimes or an organization that works with children. I mean, that's okay, but it's not necessarily the only thing. And I think like we're talking about interdisciplinarity, I think that the more people that come together from different backgrounds, from different academic backgrounds, the more interesting it is, the more we have to give to each other, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's somewhat ironic as somebody who works, who's worked who's been an academic and also now as a curator, that arts institutions and cultural institutions and the academy in particular are some of the most resistant to this kind of change, and most, really embedded in certain ways of thinking. And Jason, I wonder if it's really, how to. You both have been involved over your careers in kind of trying to crash through those particular gates, and whether you think that that's changing at all now, or if it remains entrenched thinking.
Well, I've never felt more artistically constrained than when I've worked directly with some unnamed art museums.
Yeah.
Who are like, you can't do that. That's not going to fly. And me being like, well, getting a lot of pushback from things that and then me in the beginning being like, oh well, they must know more than me because they're the big fancy art space and I'm just some clown who now thinks he's going to make an exhibition. And it wasn't until many years of arguing and trying to come to some agreement about stuff that I realized that there's a lot of conservative ness in some of these spaces that and people are they've got their own agendas, they've got their own ways in which they think that how things should be done, and it may not jive at all with my approach or with the approach of the people that I work with.
The idea.
Yeah, I mean the experiences of migrants. For me, oftentimes, some of these spaces are like, well, that's too much, that's too intense, and I'm like, well, that's how people experience it. That's it. That it is a traumatic. Oftentimes, it's often traumatic and challenging, and it's not this clean kind of easy thing. And so people who are invested in having their stories told don't want it to be whitewashed. And so we've over the years had had interesting conversations with some galleries and spaces about what we could or couldn't do, or they take it in the opposite direction where they don't have a sensibility about a sensitivity towards the people's experiences of migration, and so they might want to do stuff that these migrant communities would be like, that's completely inappropriate, and they're not consulting with those folks to get that kind of feedback. That's been an interesting thing. But working with nonprofits, with migrant shelters and other groups, the way that we always approach is we come in and we say, look, we want to do, these are things that we're interested in doing that we think might be interesting and useful, but you need to tell us what is going to be the best use of our time in your space. How can we best help your community? And I've just been, people are so open. I mean, they're just excited oftentimes just to have some new, fresh approach come in, especially one that's, we're not trying to be, we're not arrogant about it, or, our agenda is minimal. Beyond our agenda is we want to figure out a way to help you in this space, but we need you to tell us what that's going to look like. And people have just always been so gracious and really just open to to collaborating. And we're working on some new exhibitions where right now we have a current exhibition, Hostile Terrain 94, there's about 20 shows up, and another 120 shows will go up sometime this year, we hope, which are deep collaborations with different communities. But with those ones, we bring part of the exhibition's already built, and then folks are sort of building around that and adding their own and adding pieces to it and collaborating in that sense. But we have a new exhibition that we're starting to develop after that, which will basically, we will start and we will do every single step of development and design in-house with collaboration with migrant shelters, with migrants. And so we come and we say, we want to put on a show. What is that going to look like? And then now let's spend the next month figuring out, how do you want to design it? What's the best use of time and space here? And so we're really excited for those types of collaborations, because I think that in those spaces, people don't have a particular artistic agenda, or the hang-ups about like it has to look like this or has to look like that. They've never done it, we've never done it, and so I think there's a lot more freedom in those kinds of scenarios.
Yeah, there's so much more to say, Jason, about who the we is and what the exhibitions are. So I asked my colleague to put those links to that information in the chat, because I see that we're coming up close to time here. But I wanted to ask Wendy, there was a question in the chat about how your process and kind of the editing of images and sequencing of images, and how much that affects narrative, the development of a narrative in telling a story. And so they'd like to know, this person would like to know a little bit more about how you help participants with this, and how you teach them or work with them to understand the role of this, and kind of sequencing and images and developing their own image making practice.
Yeah, well, that's something. Well, it sort of ties into also I wanted to say about where we are now in what we're doing, and one of the things that I think is going to be extremely important in this project eventually is to work on that narrative and taking, there's many different ways of doing it, obviously, but I've always worked with words and pictures, and there are strengths in both of them, and they both do things when they're put together with the others, and so that they understand that if they want to use a caption or a bit of text, like when we were talking about those shoes that Susanna was showing us, the flip-flops of her mother, she wrote a beautiful just line around them, talking about, the end of her mother's day. And I think that this, what I'd like to do, and hopefully it will happen, but we don't know, is to make with them, to make some little stories that tell the things that they're concerned with, but figuring out what they want to use for those stories. Do they want to use do they want to start with pictures and make a story out of pictures and then add a narrative? Do they want to write a narrative? So it's kind of playing with all those things to see what happens, and if all goes as I imagine in my mind at this point, which is it then could be something that's in the trains or something that's has a linear space that people are in, and they're have time to look around, and so it would sort of be part of the daily life of the city, but it will be a moment in their lives that they're sharing. or a short story that they're sharing. Yeah, so my process is really different in different situations, depending, like, when we're talking about the virus and moving from immigration, the main topic, to the virus. You have to be obviously flexible, and try to see as much as you can what is going on and what makes sense. And that's why it was so hard to do it virtually for me, because it was like I had blurry lenses, and so I wasn't able to see as well as I might have. But then we'll be there again. I'll be there again soon. And we just learned that New York is starting to, as of today, give the virus to 65-year-olds.
Vaccine. The virus.
I always say the virus. I just think for the same thing. Yeah, the vaccine. So, maybe I'll be there sooner rather than later. And then also working with Jason, I'm really excited to go to Chiapas and go back and see what it's like now, since 1991, and work with those folks there, and then bring that work together with the work that the Centro kids have been doing, and also we're excited to hopefully to work with the poet in Chicago, who has been writing about the Popol Vuh and quarantine. So I think there's a lot of there's a lot to look at, and to figure out how to look at it, where to put it, and
so there's another question for you, Wendy, that's related, and I would actually expand this question for everybody. The question is for Wendy is, what do you think? What do you want people to know about your work that usually gets left out of exhibition text or books? And I think we could ask the same question of Jason, which is, what do you want how do people want people to understand your work versus how maybe it's introduced? And I think the same can extend to the ladies from Centro. What are the kind of misconceptions about what you do that are impediments, and that you want people to know about the spaces that you inhabit? So I'm going to start with Wendy, but that's a kind of an open question.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, because some of it relates to power in a way, that who has the right to speak, and for themselves, for whom, and who has what value is attributed to work. And one of the things I've always struggled with is that I think that the images that the students I work with are as valuable or as any artists. There's, and when I was talking about before, those barriers between, what gets appreciated and what doesn't get appreciated. And so I feel like that's with my work as well, is that I don't want it to be seen as something that is only helping, the immigrants or helping the refugees, but it's helping the rest of the world, to understand, to be responsible, to appreciate. So that's sort of.
And I'm sorry, and if I can jump in just to add with what Wendy's saying, I think that's where the fear of the other people or other ethnicities comes into the lack of knowledge, right? And one of the things that I will hope that this project does is that it tells others that we're similar. A lot of us have the same beliefs, same values, same culture, and then for them also to appreciate that diversity that comes within that. So that's one of our hopes too, that people get to know our immigrant and refugee community, and that we might, we might have equal equality, equal things that we do and believe in.
Jason?
Yeah, I guess for me, part of it is getting people to, I think oftentimes the critique of my work is that it's this political project that is seeking to change people's minds. And my response is everything is political. Even the projects that are overtly apolitical, that's a political decision to remove politics from this discussion. And I think that oftentimes people can be dismissive of stuff by pulling that. So why does it have to always be political? And it's like, well, because it is, because it all is. Art is political. Anthropology is political. But rather than, so I think oftentimes people will use that as a way to be dismissive of something, as a way to say, that's not something that I'm sort of interested in, or I'm not here to have you change my mind kind of thing. I'm not interested in changing minds. I'm interested in sharing people's experiences, and I'm interested in showing them how the world actually looks, and challenging narratives around what it is to migrate and what those experiences are, in hopes that people can be exposed to these things and feel like they are challenged, and then make a decision about how they want to feel about this stuff. I think oftentimes it's just too the interpretation can be too sort of simplistic, and so I've tried very, very hard to complicate that narrative, and sometimes I think people aren't paying enough attention, and they sort of miss that point. But I'm working on a project right now. My first book was about migrants crossing the U.S.-Mexico border through Arizona. It very much was about people's experiences on the ground, and I think in a lot of ways, if you say to someone, I'm writing a book about migration or about migrants, it's pretty easy to be sympathetic towards migrants, because I think most people, or at least a good portion of people, can see those people suffering and sort of empathize with them. Although recent elections have shown us that several million people in this country could care less. But I think that there's more than just sympathizing. I'm not here to create a sympathy project. It's not like I don't. And the people that I write about don't want sympathy. I think they want to be understood, but they don't want to be felt sorry for. And so I'm trying to push against that narrative and make it more complicated. And my current project is about smugglers, which is the kind of opposite of that, where you say, oh, I'm writing about smugglers, and people say, well, those are the bad guys. Those are the people who do bad things. And of course, I want to respond and say, well, they're caught up in a bunch of horrible stuff. They will do bad things, but nobody chooses to be a smuggler. They don't fall out of the sky. They are part of this much larger political and economic process that creates the needs for smugglers, that creates different forms of violence, and people get wrapped up in those things for all kinds of different reasons. And so I want people to kind of think about those individuals also in a way that's not so black and white. And so I think for me, it's oftentimes the projects are read as like this sort of liberal leaning, dogmatic kind of thing. And for me, it's really the world of migration is much more gray. And I'm very interested in those stories that complicate that narrative, so that there's not, just the simplistic headline, but, something that's perhaps more nuanced.
Yeah. I mean, so we're 3 minutes to the hour, so I'm going to wrap this up. And I just to say, this is also a question that comes up certainly in artistic institutions and cultural institutions about, being accused of, or the relative value of projects that seem explicitly political, or that are accused of being explicitly political. And my general response to that is, that we're not forcing people to come to certain conclusions, but rather that this is the subject of this project, and it forces a reckoning with something that you otherwise could claim not to know about, so that the conversation is more important than the changing of people's minds. But also that I think that's often a claim made by folks who prefer not to know, but that ignorance does not equal innocence, and that if you choose not to know something or choose not to be aware of it, doesn't mean that you aren't complicit in the activities that make those processes or those realities a reality. I think, we said a little bit about the pandemic. We didn't say anything specific today about what happened last week and the efforts of white supremacists to overturn a democratic election and because they're afraid of just this kind of conversation and what and the community that you all work with. So I want to thank you all for doing the things that you do and for being with us today. I want to thank our friends at Public Media Institute and Lumpen Radio for hosting us, and say that as a kind of continuation of this, that Wendy, the installation of photographs that the students put up at Centro Romero is still there, and I understand that the exhibition has been extended. Ladies, how long will it be there now?
I believe we have the space until March.
Okay.
If we need to keep it longer, we will, depending on how the pandemic goes.
Yeah.
But it's open from now till, and you don't have to come inside. It's outside in our doors, 6216 North Clark Street.
So please come and see, please go and see the exhibition, walk by. You can find more about, I know that we've put in the chat links to the work that all of these good people do. So please look into that. And also I'm sure Michael, who is taking care of the chat, will put in the link to the exhibition webpage. There'll be more information there, and please stay tuned for the public version of Wendy's project. And we're hoping very much to get Jason to Chicago while the exhibition is up. And then I would just put in one more plug, which is for a project that we're also doing as part of Toward Common Cause with the artist Guillermo Gomez Pena, which will kick off later this month, also a radio program, followed by a series of live performances. Thank you all so much for joining us. I hope everybody is safe and be well and take care of yourselves. And we'll see you all soon again, I hope.
Thank you.
Thank you all.